I want to introduce now Reza Kahlili, a very brave gentleman, someone who risked his life for freedom, for what he believes in. He became a CIA case officer, in effect a double agent, and he buried himself inside of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, which controls Iran. We heard Jim Woolsey, the CIA director, talk about that earlier. And one of the things that we can't lose sight of is that it's not just a question of national security, and that's why the name of this conference is National Security, Freedom, and Iran. Is it time for direct U.S. and Western intervention? But it's a question of individual liberty, as Ambassador Keyes just said. And this is a gentleman who has stood there not just for his own people, but has been here for the United States. And I want to introduce you to Reza Kahlili, who will have his voice modulated. He'll be appearing behind a mask because he still is in effect undercover and his security is still at risk. Reza?
Well, it's a great pleasure and an honor to be here today alongside the distinguished speakers, whom I have a lot of respect for. And for that, I want to thank Larry Klayman for organizing this event and for his kindness in inviting me. My name is Reza Kahlili. Of course, that's not my real name. It's a pseudonym to protect my family and the ones back there in Iran. Let me start by telling you a bit about myself. I was born and raised in Tehran, Iran, and it was in the early 70s that I came to the US to continue my education. By the time I graduated, the Iranian Revolution had taken place, and that's when I returned home eager to help my country, believing that freedom and democracy was at hand. After I returned, my childhood friend urged me to join the Revolutionary Guards. He convinced me that my expertise and my education would help with the progress of the country. At first, there was brotherhood and a hope for progress, but things went downhill pretty fast. The takeover of the American embassy and the hostage taking of the Americans was the first step to wake me up to the reality of what was taking place in my country. But there was much more. The killing of all the officers under the Shah, then the killing of the courts in their uprising, and then revolutionary courts were formed and mass executions took place. There was no trial, no defense, just a verdict by a clergy judge. Thousands were executed. Many political parties were banned. Universities were shut down to bring them in line with Shiite Islam. The clerics called people who objected to them as muharib, or those waging war against God. The punishment was death by hanging. However, what I witnessed at Evin prison changed me forever. Teenage girls were raped before execution because the clerics believed that if a girl dies a virgin, she will go to heaven, and they wanted to deny them this reward. Boys were tortured in unimaginable ways before they would hang them from cranes. After what I witnessed, and especially after what happened to my best friend, I decided to do something to change the situation and defeat this evil. I decided to travel to America and seek help. I contacted the FBI and then was introduced to the CIA. And in an odd turn of events, I became a spy. I worked for the agency in Iran and then Europe and here in the US from somewhere in the 80s till about the mid-90s. I reestablished contact after the 9/11 with some information, and most recently I passed on information on a possible secret nuclear site, which was passed on to me by an eyewitness in Iran. Throughout my work, I reported the Guards' activity in expanding their terror network, their training of terrorists, and their terrorist acts. I reported on the philosophy of the clerical establishment and their goals of exporting their version of Islam. One report was about how China was helping the Revolutionary Guards. They were training members of the Guards in a base in China. and they were supplying them arms, which got a reaction from George Shultz criticizing China openly. Another time, I reported of the Guards' offensive to capture Basra, where they were going to head fake to another front, and recently learned through someone at the Pentagon that specific cable ended up at Caspar Weinberger's desk. He said Weinberger's papers made clear that my report was a key factor in US discussions about how to contain Iran. But it was not just China and Russia or the Soviet Union then who were helping the Guards with arming and training them. But shockingly, the Europeans were involved too. England, Germany, Sweden, and others were selling arms to the Guards despite the arms embargo in place by the President Reagan's administration. But most disturbingly was the fact that America was also involved in trying to work with the mullahs, and I was puzzled and confused why the message was not getting across. Why was the West not getting it? I was a witness to several negotiation attempts by US administrations where they were very hopeful in a positive outcome, and where the only common outcome was failure. I was informed by my friends in the Guards when McFarlane traveled to Iran and met with Rafsanjani. I later learned the US government was meeting in private with Revolutionary Guards in the mid-80s. One of them, the same guy who had facilitated the kidnap of William Buckley in Beirut, who was killed by the Islamic Jihad. At that time, Rafsanjani had promised normalization of relations once Khomeini died. And in the late 80s, when Khomeini died, President Bush's administration committed itself in negotiation with Rafsanjani, believing that he will deliver on his promise of normalizing relations. At that time, I was working in Europe, and I had learned from Iranian agents that Rafsanjani himself had ordered the Lockerbie bombing, and that it was carried out by the Quds forces with the help of the Palestinians. I passed that information to my CIA handler, and but instead, he told me to consider Rafsanjani the new king of Iran, and that he would be good for Iran. Of course, that didn't take long when in early 90s, my CIA contact asked me to look for an Iranian who would testify that Iran was working on a nuclear bomb. It was obvious President Bush wanted revenge for the broken promise of Rafsanjani, who had played him for all those times. This short-sightedness continued with President Clinton, who looked the other way at Iran's involvement in the Khobar Towers bombing in Saudi Arabia, and failed in negotiating with Mohammad Khatami, the next president of Iran, with another promise of cooperation, while secretly purchasing parts of Iran's nuclear project. This continued with President Obama, who missed the biggest opportunity to bring change to Iran by supporting the people in last year's uprising. He mistakenly calculated that backdoor negotiations with Ahmadinejad and Iran's clerics and promises made by them would bring cooperation on nuclear issue. Well, we all know how that turned out. The question is, how do you negotiate with terrorists? Almost every Iranian official is either wanted by the court somewhere in the world or wanted by the Interpol. Iran's Ahmad Vahidi, the current defense minister, is on the Interpol's most wanted list. He was the ex-Ghost Force commander, and he was indicted for the bombing of the Jewish Community Center in Argentina. He oversees Iran's nuclear project and the proliferation of arms to Syria, Islamic Jihad, Hezbollah, Hamas, Taliban, Al-Qaeda, and others. It was him and Mohsen Rezai who got the approval of Ayatollah Khomeini in the mid-80s to start the nuclear bomb project in response to Saddam's pursuit of the same, which I reported to the agency. It was then that the Guards approached the Pakistanis to buy the actual bomb, offering billions of dollars in cash, but ended up with the centrifuges instead. Iran today has over 2.8 tons of enriched uranium and and the Bushehr nuclear facility can provide them with more than 50 nuclear bombs within a year or so. This is while they have succeeded in a solid fuel missile delivery system and are working on weaponizing the collaboration of North Korea. We must take action, for not only global stability relies on a steady flow of energy out of the Persian Gulf, where the world gets 40% of its fuel, but also world's security relies on stopping the spread of nuclear material and arms to terrorists who would not hesitate to use it against us. And so the urgency to stop radicals in Iran from obtaining nuclear bomb and the need to help Iranians to overthrow this messianic regime. You see, what you have witnessed recently happening on the streets of Tehran and throughout Iran is nothing new. Ever since early 80s, just a couple of years into the revolution, the Iranians have been pushing for freedom, for democracy, and they've been paying dearly for that. The Iranians are one of the most pro-Western nations in the Middle East. But through suppression by the Islamic fanatics ruling the country, their voices have been shut before it could reach out to the world. I think that after 30 years of trying every which way in appeasing the murderers in Iran, and after 30 years of sidestepping our principles and humanity, we should be asking, how do we help the aspirations of the Iranian people in their pursuit for freedom? It is essential to understand that the establishment ruling Iran is truly committed to the belief of end of times and reappearance of Imam Mahdi, the 12th Shiite Imam, when Islam will conquer the world and kill all the remaining non-believers. These are the people who, in their imaginary mind, talk to the dead and believe that a 5-year-old boy who went missing centuries ago now is awaiting the appearance from a veil in the Mosque of Jamkaran. These are the people who believe that centuries ago Prophet Muhammad and his kings had predicted this day. In their mind, all the events have taken place, and the only missing part, called in centuries-old hadith, is total chaos and a complete breakdown in global economy. When 1/3 of the world population dies from nuclear wars and the rest find no sanctuary, and these are the people who are pursuing nuclear bombs. For them, it's Allah's demand to kill all non-believers for the final glorification of Islam. In 1938, British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain chose to appease Hitler, thinking Hitler had limited ambitions that could be appeased. But as we know, Hitler could not be appeased. He had to be defeated. And so today, I stand before you to bring awareness of the fact that if we once again remain silent in the face of evil, humanity will witness another Holocaust, but in much greater magnitude. Millions will die and millions of others will suffer unimaginable horrors. We will witness one of the greatest depression and destruction in human history. It is time that we take action and help Iranians free themselves before it's too late for all of us. This could easily be done, as today the divide within the regime's establishment is sharper than ever it's been. There is dissent in the revolutionary guards, the very force that has kept this regime in place and has supported the clerics. Many guard commanders have been replaced, some others have been arrested, while others, having lost their sense of loyalty to the regime, have either left or defected. Meanwhile, the hardliners are at each other's throats. The parliament, Ahmadinejad's government, the Guardian Council, the Assembly of Experts, and the Supreme Leader's office are all in a struggle to stop the dissension within their forces that started after last year's fraudulent presidential election. Ayatollah Khamenei has lost all credibility, and the legitimacy of the Islamic Republic, which they claimed for so many years, is now completely lost. Unrest is everywhere. Among the students, teachers, union workers, Iranian regular army officers, and most importantly, the merchants at the bazaar.